I've caught 90 trout in the last 15 days. Bro, I'm a psychopath. I've kind of figured out which spots hold the most fish and how to find these spots. So I'm going to show you exactly how I find the best trout spots and how to predict exactly where the fish will be. I've kind of narrowed it down to like 3 important steps that you could follow. Also, try not to skip any of them because it kind of like it builds on top of each other. So the first step that I've done to find some good trout spots is to actually go online and do some research about it. And what I mean by this is go to your state's stocking website. So look up, for example, Pennsylvania trout stocking website or whatever the heck it is. And you can click around and look and see exactly where they put the fish in, how many fish they put in, and where you can park to get to those spots, which is pretty nice. And I basically had no idea this existed until about like a year ago. And looking at this website has really helped me become more efficient in the spots I pick. Be aware of this thing called in-season closures. Basically what this means is that the river or creek or whatever will be closed from a certain time. So for example, from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or whatever. So now that we know how many fish are in the river, where they stock the fish, and where to park, the next most important thing that I've done is exploring water and covering water. If I did not do these two things, I probably would have caught half the amount or even less, probably like 30 trout. I swear, if you don't put in the time to cover the water, it's not gonna happen, dude. I will literally do whatever it takes to catch these fish, whether it be climbing over logs, rocks, wading water that you probably shouldn't wade, and even taking a swim a couple of times. Whoa. Whoa. And what I've found after doing this is that the hard to reach spots deter a lot of the older guys because they simply just can't get around into these harder spots, which is probably the only upside of being a younger angler is that you can reach the spots the older guys can't reach because they definitely got us on the knowledge part. Finding those super remote spots will definitely help you catch more trout. And lastly, step 3, the single most important factor that I've found that goes into finding trout, that is predicting where the trout are going to be. Predicting where the trout are going to be is going to save you a ton of time that you could actually use to go explore different spots. If you've ever been to a river, you probably noticed that, some spots have faster moving water and then some spots have slower stuff. And you'll also notice that some are shallow and some are pretty deep. And what I found after catching these 90 trout is that most of the trout will sit in the deeper water that is behind some faster moving stuff. The reason for this is because trout don't actually want to use a lot of energy, and if they're swimming in current, they're obviously going to use more energy. And a second benefit of sitting in a deeper spot in front or behind fast moving water is that all the food is going to get sucked into the current and they're just going to sit in the back or the front and pick it off. It's like ingrained in their genes to do that, so you could take advantage of that. Now I'm going to go over a couple examples of different spots that I've fished. So if you look at this first spot right here, you'll notice that there's faster water way up in the front, and then there's this big long stretch of deeper water right next to the bank. There's also, this is an added bonus, there's trees over the top of the water which provide cover for the trout to sit in. And so all I did at this spot was stand on the bank right next to the deep water, and all I did was just pitch my lure out, and I'd slowly let it just honestly sit there. I was barely even reeling most of the time. The reason for this was I wanted to let it sink down to the spot where the fish would bite, which is usually right next to the bottom. And you can see I'm just pulling trout out of that deeper stretch, especially under the trees. That's where they really like to sit. The second spot I fished, you can hear a bunch of cars going by, and that's because there's a big bridge like way up here. If I had to guess, that's where they chucked the trout off because, my state is lazy and they don't send guys in the river to stock, so they just chuck them off the bridge. But you can see there's super fast water, and then it just flows into this nice deep stretch right here. And I'm just standing probably halfway in the river just casting, and I'm just pulling fish out left and right. And then this last spot, same exact thing. You can see there's fast water up front, and right next to the bank there's this deep stretch. There's also some big boulders there, which is pretty good for fishing because the trout like to sit behind them. And again, I'm just pulling fish out left and right. So you can see how there's a bit of a pattern in the spots that trout will sit in. Deeper, slower water, usually with faster water in front or behind it. That's what I found to really hold a lot of fish. And although I catch about 90% of my trout in these spots with the deeper water and all that, it's still important to note that you could catch trout in shallower water. And how do I know this? Well, I'm a psychopath and I cast at every single part of the river. And one last quick little thing I want to mention. If you've been sitting in a spot for like 5 minutes and you haven't got a bite, switch your lure or switch spots. What I've noticed is that if a trout was around, he would have already taken interest in your lure. He would have either followed it to the bank or he would have bit. So if you haven't gotten either of those, switch up. But yeah, that's how I find trout. It's my job as a professional psychopath to do all the fishing so that you can go out and do all the catching. Use these tips and go catch some fish. Peace.